Order, order. Laura Pidcock to move a motion.
I'd like to move that this House has considered 10 years of the work capability assessment in relation to employment and support allowance and universal credit. Thank you, Chair. This feels like such an inadequate environment to describe the work capability assessment and its brutal consequences. I wish that every single person affected by the system could be here with us in this room and look at those who will defend this system in the eyes. I hope that what I'm about to describe, the people opposite with me, not many of them, will feel shame, and I hope that throughout this session we can do justice to the experiences of those people subject to the work capability assessment. The work capability assessment in relation to employment and support allowance and universal credit should be a simple concept. That if you have a physical or mental health problem or disability that prevents you from working, either temporarily or permanently, you will receive a replacement income from the state if it is found that you cannot work and or have a limited ability to work. I will talk about the face-to-face application process and the assessment and how I feel they are draconian, elicit fear, deny justice and have, in some circumstances, ended up contributing to the end of life. As Francis Ryan wrote in The Guardian recently, suicide is becoming a feature of the system. Everybody in this room will know somebody who is unable to work for whatever reason. Those people with personal wealth are often able to avoid having to prove that they are worthy of income replacement. They're saved from having to share every single detail of a condition or illness and do not have to wonder if they will be believed because they have that personal wealth. People without savings, on the other hand, are only one step away, one accident, one conversation with a doctor from being subject to that system. Based on the evidence gathered from my constituents when they come to surgeries, submissions from professionals, and from the vast amount of submissions that I have received from people currently applying for this social security payment, here are some of the elements that we believe are wrong with the system. In both the application form and the face-to-face assessment, the descriptors which enable a score to be given to assess the ability to carry out a task are essentially a functionality test. They cannot capture the fluctuating nature of physical and mental unwellness or disability and how that could prevent or limit the ability to work. People often describe how they feel punished for telling the truth, that perhaps, yes, they could go out unescorted on a journey somewhere, but the test was not interested in, for example, the panic attack before leaving the house or the emotional recovery afterwards, that perhaps venturing to the supermarket will have been the only trip out that month, but making the journey could lose someone their entitlement. In reality, one day you might be in the depths of despair, the pain from your condition may be unbearable. The next day, you might be able to have a laugh over a cup of tea with a loved one. The question is, should you lie about that laughter or feel shame about it because you might get points deducted? Does that laughter render meaningless the pain that you felt from the day before? Fundamentally, does it have any bearing on your ability to work? I think not. The test ignores the complex reality of living with long-term or fluctuating conditions. Many people have told us that they do not feel accurately represented by the reports written about them. Advisors have openly claimed that they see copy and paste jobs. A constituent read that they were apparently happy and confident during the assessment when in fact they were crying and shaken. No wonder as many as 74% of ESA decisions are overturned at appeal, according to the Citizens Advice Bureau. This, of course, is one of the consequences of using a private company to assess the medical conditions of people who need support. Not having people qualified in the conditions or illness which they are presented with is also a huge issue. It is claimed that Maximus offer incentivise health professionals in terms of the number of reports they're able to complete, and logic says that that could directly lead to there being a proliferation of inaccuracies. Ultimately, profit should not be made from ill health. It leads to corner cutting, misplaced priorities, and to defend the marketisation of this process, in my view, is obscene. I'm not sure why the government, or I'm not sure they realise, or members opposite, realise just how truly terrified some people are of the brown envelope from the DWP. They know that they're going to be forced through a lengthy and extremely difficult process. They'll have to attend an assessment that once they've received a decision notice about the outcome of their work capability assessment, they are often inaccurate and misleading, leading to long, stressful appeals processes of up to 18 months. That's 18 months of those people without the entitlement that they deserve. And of course, this process exacerbates poor health. The government makes things worse. When people, because of their physical or mental health condition, ask that their assessment be carried out at home, the answer is almost always no. My caseworkers and other agencies have substantial evidence to the private contractors to show that my constituents would have severe difficulty attending the assessment centre. The stock response is this: if the claimant can get to their own GP or to the hospital, they can attend the assessment centre. I mean, how cold-hearted is this? If the person does... I will give way.
Thank you, Sir Henry. On that point, does she not agree that there is, of course, a difference between going to a location which may be quite close to your home, which you're familiar with, and an assessment centre which may be many miles away, which may be difficult to get to unless you've got your own transport?
The member is absolutely right. And in a place like northwest Durham, where we have an inadequate and expensive transport system, when you are feeling unwell and the stress of having to go to that assessment, it not being able to be carried out at home is unjustifiable. If the person does manage to get to the assessment centre, the assessor then uses that evidence of their ability to travel, walk, sit comfortably and cope with social interactions. One person got in touch with me to say that they had to sit in soaking wet clothes due to incontinence issues that they had in the waiting room of that assessment centre. Is this a system that anyone here can really defend? Is anyone really comfortable with a private provider forcing people to attend these assessments in pain, in worry, to be degraded by the DWP? If a person is found fit for work when in fact they are not, it can have a huge impact on a person's mental as well as financial well-being. It can have a direct impact on their entitlement to housing benefit, council tax benefit, plunging a person into destitution with increasing debt, risk of eviction and untold stress. People found wrongly fit for work are then expected to do job searches and training and are even sanctioned. And it comes as no surprise to any of us on this side that in 2016 the UN concluded that the government had committed grave systematic violations of the rights of people with disabilities. The report should have seen an end to this government, but they limp on. If you do, however, go on to win an appeal, the frequency of reassessment is too frequent. No sooner have you won that appeal are you being reassessed. Even people with terminal illnesses have to endure this. And imagine the retriggering, assessment after assessment, the retriggering of your mental health difficulties if you have to describe the historic sexual abuse that you have been subject to in that process. Let me now go on to tell you some of the contributions from people who got in touch. One person said that this process feels like psychological rape, expressly designed to make you feel like you are the absolute property of the state, that you're not human, and that your continued survival is a basic affront to society. Another said, when you are disabled, you are defined by able-bodied people, what you cannot do rather than what you can do. No disabled person wants to be a burden on society. They want to be an active contributor, but are denied this by society. And the whole thing should be abolished, as it's cruel and a pointless exercise in ideology. And of course it is about ideology at the end of the day, isn't it? Because the system, its complexities, its high thresholds, the way employment and support allowance and higher rates of universal credit have been denied to so many people cannot be seen outside of the context of 10 years almost, of austerity and budget cuts, literally taking money from people who are disabled, unwell or dying. And what are the worst consequences of this system, the ultimate results of this brutality? Jodie Whiten lived in Thornaby, not too far away from my constituency, and took her life 15 days after her benefits were stopped for missing a work capability assessment when seriously ill. The independent case examiner found multiple failings on the DWP's part of them, simple cases of them not following their own safeguarding procedures. Her mum Joy Dove is campaigning for an independent inquiry into benefit deaths, and I am sure everyone on this side would say all power to her in that campaign. Stephen Smith, 64, who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, osteoarthritis and an enlarged prostate that left him in chronic pain, failed a work capability assessment in 2017, which meant that his ESA payments were stopped. Anybody who saw Stephen's emaciated body on social media will have been horrified. Stephen died last Monday. Jeff Hayward, who won his appeal 7 months after his death, had a debilitating skin condition and spent his last 18 months fighting for a fit-for-work decision. Michael O'Sullivan, aged 60, from North London, had a long-term mental health problem, and the coroner found the benefit process was a key trigger to his death. These are the real-life tragedies of a broken system, and I don't think I can bear to hear the Minister get up and say yet again that we should come to them with our individual problems with the system as his predecessor did, because they are not individual problems. They are systemic failings and a consequence of privatising social security alongside 37 billion worth of welfare cuts. Because let's be honest, this is institutionalised bullying and harassment of sick and disabled people. I have no doubt that administrative ineptitude is part of it, but on this scale, there can be no other conclusion. Deliberately stripping people of their rights to disrupt the welfare state and the very concept of legal entitlement. The government has trodden all over the expectations of citizens that they will be looked after in their hour of need. And for what? To replace the state with private and family provision, to boost the coffers of private insurers and replace legal rights with charity subject to moral judgments of deservedness. But it really doesn't have to be like this. How can our social security system be about that, about security and not about punishment? The Labour Party is rightly committed to scrap the work capability assessment. That'll be a big step forward, no doubt, and it'll be welcomed by disability rights groups and welfare rights agencies alike. In the meantime, why don't the government start the process of rectifying some of these injustices in the system by taking the vast amounts of evidence from medical professionals into account, from GPs, from consultants, from nurses? Testimony should be believed fundamentally, because the DWP, the culture permeating that department is one of disbelief, which looks so cynically upon people who request help. Stressful face-to-face assessment should only be used if there is an absolute necessity, and that lack of evidence to decide entitlement, that there isn't enough evidence present. The assessments should be of last resort. The system should be designed fundamentally by people who are the experts through experience, and experts who understand how conditions affect ability to work or not should be employed. Any social security system to replace the work capability assessment as it exists today should not be a functionality test with arbitrary rules which do not account for the fluctuating nature of a person's condition, disability or illness. There needs to be a revision of the assessment criteria, which is linked much more closely to the real world of work, or the work that the person was doing. Knowing whether somebody can move a carton of milk with one hand, to one side to the other, cannot allow us to understand a person's comfort or ability to work in a specific environment. Any process should include an assessment of the additional support that person would need to ease them back into the workplace. Recording of assessments should just be standard unless the person asks that they are not recorded. The government really are dragging their heels on that recommendation. Private outsourcing of these assessments has got to be scrapped. The market has failed all aspects of the social security system, placing company profit before the need of the people interacting with the system. When will the government understand that private enterprise and illness are incompatible and inevitably lead to injustices that we see today? And fundamentally, Chair, and on this point I'll close, at a point in life when people are dealing with the stresses of not being in full health, of needing support of their disability or mental health condition, they should not be subject to further stress, degradation and even abuse inflicted on them by the state. The system should be designed on the presumption that people are telling the truth These people are telling the truth when they come to see the assessors, not forcing them through this humiliating and exhausting process. That often the results in them winning the appeals at tribunal anyway, only with the help of the excellent underfunded advice agencies and many of our caseworkers actually in this room. For many, their last fight on this earth is not with their illness, but it is with the state. And that fact alone should lead us to scrap this dreadful system.
Yeah.
The question is that this House has considered 10 years of the work capability assessment in relation to employment support allowance and universal credit. I now call Jim Shannon. I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her very moving and impressive speech. And we're going to have an informal limit of 7 minutes from now onwards. And if Honourable Right Honourable Collins could adhere to that, I'd be very grateful. Mr. Jim Shannon.
Sir Henry, thank you for calling me. Can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for North West Durham for presenting the case so very well, with the passion that we all know that she has for the subject matter and with the belief that she's done as well. To say that the difficulty with ESA and the transition to universal credit is evident in my constituency is a gross understatement. I've talked to the Minister about this on a number of occasions. He knows that. His door has always been open, by the way. He's always asked, he's told me that any issues I have to bring them to him. I've done that, and I have to say I find him very responsive and helpful. And I'm hoping today, at the end of this debate, when we've all made our contribution, that the Minister will be able to address some of the issues that I have, that others have, and put our minds at ease. The difficulty people are facing is astronomical. My comments will not be a surprise to anyone here. I'm known as a man with a very soft heart, and when I'm sitting looking at a person who is clearly ill and vulnerable, and when they have tears in their eyes, they simply don't understand what is happening and feel that they're alone and helpless. And to be honest, it's very, very hard, Sir Henry, to be not upset with them and also part angry for them at the system which puts so much stress and pressure on the most vulnerable in our society. I'm all for getting people up and out to work, giving training, helping to build and boost confidence and start a job and all the rest. I don't want to see one able person out of work in Strangford, but it's seeking to weed out the few who could work but won't. We are mentally exhausting and physically injuring those who are not capable. My staff recently dealt with a case. I want to give this example. It's a real good. I think it exemplifies perhaps what I want to say maybe in all my comments. It's a young man who was living in his car. It came very clear to me early on, and this is just about a month ago. This young man was broken. There's no other way to describe it. I called in my parliamentary aide to the meeting, and she's a very sympathetic person. She had her arm around him, telling him that he was important and that he mattered, and helping him get a fresh start. This was definitely, Sir Henry, a man on the edge. I don't know how he got into that position, what mistakes he'd made, and the only companion he had was his dog. But then again, Sir Henry, I don't need to know that. I just wanted to know, needed him to know that we could help him. We have a very phenomenally helpful Elizabeth. She's a manageress in the local job centre. Her worked her way through the issues with the benefits and helped him. He just couldn't face people. So that's a guy that was outside the system. So we had to take him and do everything for him. That's what happened on that day. We spoke to the housing executive. He managed to sort out the hostel accommodation for him in the short term, and now he has his own flat. And that all happened out of that meeting that we had. We spoke to the local food bank based at Thriving Life Church in Newton Ards, who provide him with food and sanitary products. We spoke to all of these people that because he was so low and so down, he couldn't have spoken to because he hadn't got the ability to have socially interact with people. We spoke because he couldn't speak for himself. So my staff in my office were very, very able to help him and get him out of the corner and dark hole that he was in. But when I think of this young man, a man who couldn't even look us in the eye that day, and whom I knew was on the precipice of the point of no return, I thought how he was expected in that state of work with no mercy shown. I was reminded of the role that we have in this House, that we're very blessed and privileged to have a role as an MP to represent those people and try to help them in the times that they need that help more than others. There are just too many people living in their cars who can't get a break and don't know where to turn to. Too many people who have been pushed to the edge of darkness and feel alone. And it tells me that we need more Elizabeths and Lees in our job centres. We need more Owens and Arans in the housing executives. We need more Natalies and Suzannes in the food banks. People who couldn't wave a magic wand to make it all right, but did their part that saw this young man over a few weeks in a position where he could look me in the eye and say thank me. And what a turnaround that was. Unfortunately, Sir Henry, that was one example. In that period of 3 weeks, I realised very much that there was a number of people who were outside. They were under the radar, where I would put them. People who had slipped they weren't in touch with the benefits office, who weren't in touch with the executive or with others. So we do need to task all civil service staff with the fact that compassion is as much a qualification as an English GCSE. Quite happy to, yes.
I'm sure no gentleman mentions compassion, but isn't it also correct that there must be professionalism? So Linda Hending in my constituency set up a support group for people with ME, and she found that 10 out of the 11 of those people had been refused either been found fit for work or had insufficient points for PIP. But all of them had those decisions overturned on appeal. So whilst it's inevitable there'll need to be some assessment, isn't it critically important that those decisions are got right first time so that people don't have to go through the strain of an appeal, even if it's successful in the long term?
Absolutely, the other gentleman is absolutely right. I'm going to say that. I have a number of girls in my office, one in particular who does nothing but benefits. She works full-time on ESAs, PIPs and DLAs as a turnover goes for income supports and all those other different things. Full-time and benefits, and the other staff fit in with that as well. And the number of appeals that we win because of the advice that's given. To be fair to the Minister, I've suggested that to him, that we need to have staff who are professional and able to advise in the way that they should. Yet there are those who take advantage of, and I know sometimes that happens in the system. There are some of those who take advantage, but I want to talk about those who need the help. So 10 years into this, I still think we haven't got it right. We don't have a balance, and this is part of many people's mental health struggles. I want to very quickly, in the short time that I have, we need compassion for those who are with cancer, who are facing when claiming universal credit. Alongside the physical and emotional impacts, cancer brings with it a real risk of financial hardship. Macmillan Cancer Support has found that 4 out of 5 people with cancer are on average £570 a month worse off because of their diagnosis. Last year, Macmillan Support Line advisors have received 26,500 people seeking advice on applying for universal credit. The problems are access. People who are hospitalised often don't have access to the internet. Navigating a long and complex online application form, it is absolutely horrendous what you go through at a time that your body can't let you attend to it. Those who are undergoing treatment or have a terminal diagnosis also have to attend the job centre, which can be distressing in some cases and go against medical advice. The initial 5-week training time for universal credit is causing problems for people with cancer. Many of them have to give up their work completely due to their condition and treatment. This even applies to people with terminal illness, meaning people who may have less than 6 months to live now spend more than a month in that 6 months waiting for their benefits. Under the old system, people with a terminal illness could expect to get paid as soon as their claim is processed. We do, I believe, Minister, you know this, I spoke to you about it, we do need to address these delays. 67% of people are not receiving their payment in time. This year, the government will pilot the managed migration of people to universal credit. It is welcome that this process will be piloted before Parliament is asked to make a final decision. I welcome that, and I think it's good that we have that process. But this will not solve the problem for people already receiving universal credit. We need to do this better for everyone's sake. I look forward to the Minister at this point. We need a sea change of attitude with compassion at its heart from this place working its way to every level of public service. Young men like Michael and others will simply not survive without it. Thank you.
I again reiterate the congratulations to my honourable friend, the member for North West Durham, on an excellent speech outlining some of the range of issues that we have with this work capability assessment process. And it does feel, Sir Henry, that it is, déjà vu. We are here yet again to say and to argue the current system of work capability assessment is just not fit for purpose. We can use the latest available data that tells us that nearly 3 out of 4 claimants who appeal their assessment decision, telling them that they're fit for work, will be overturned. We can reference the 5 reviews of work capability assessment over the last 10 years, which repeatedly raise issues with the assessment process. And that ranges from medical reports being mislaid to blatant lies in assessment reports. We can look at the Work and Pension Select Committee report from last year on ESA and PIP assessment, which saw an unprecedented number, 3,500 individuals, share their experience in terms of what they had been through, and my honourable friend described that so relevantly. We can discuss the death rates for people on ESA and before that IB, which in 2013 was 4.3 times that for the general population, increasing from 3.6 in 2003, again showing the levels of sickness and ill health of people in this group. As has already been said, this is a poorly group of people and they deserve to be listened to and respected. And we can talk about the peer review research that estimated that between 2010 and 2013, work capability assessment was independently associated with an additional 590 suicides, 280,000 cases of self-reported ill health, 525,000 additional antidepressant scripts. So Henry, anyone watching this debate will be thinking, what on earth is the point? Because the government to date has taken not a jot of notice. Little has changed. And we know how this is affecting people, as we've already heard. People living in fear and dread of the envelope falling on dropping on the doormat, inviting them for their work capability assessment. The government has said that they want to amalgamate the work capability and PIP assessments by 2021. They say they want a more personalised approach and will involve disabled people in this process. So can I ask the Minister, what disabled people's organisations, I appreciate charities might have been involved and they're very important to be involved, but what DPOs and disabled people themselves have actually been involved? Have they been involved in the decision to put the contracts for this new assessment process out to tender? That's already happened. We had 1 week and then the contract went out to tender for this new process. And what are they going to do in the meantime while this government orchestrated, it is a government policy, government orchestrated harm continues? I'm really concerned, and I hope the Minister can respond to this, because up to date there has been little but warm words and platitudes. On Monday, as we've heard, we learned that Stephen Smith, the Liverpool man whose emaciated body, which is reminiscent of somebody being found in a concentration camp, not of 21st century Britain, had died as a result of multiple organ failure after being found fit for work. And we know he's not the first. We heard from our honourable friend Jeff Hayward, who died in 2018 of a heart attack, 7 days before a tribunal overturned a decision that he was fit for work. Jimmy Ballantyne, again in 2018, committed suicide after being found fit for work, along with Amy Nice, Kevin Dooley and Brian Bailey. Jodie Whiting, my honourable friend's constituent, Elaine Morrell, Danielle Obeng, Brian Sycamore, all committed suicide in 2017 as a result of being found fit for work. Mark Schofield, in July 2017, a terminal cancer patient, didn't receive any universal credit before he died in spite of his illness. Chris Gold, in 2017, was also found fit for work following a stroke. He was facing foreclosure on his home when he died, as he couldn't work. Lawrence Bond died in 2017, collapsing and dying on the street after being found fit for work. Julia Kelly, in 2015, committed suicide, as did Ben MacDonald in 2015. Chris Smith, who had cancer, was found fit for work and right up until his death, despite terminal cancer. David Clapson died in 2014. Michael Connolly in 2014. George from Chesterfield as a result of a heart attack, again being found fit for work. Robert Barlow, again a terminal claimant, died after losing his ESA. David Barr in 2014. Trevor Drackard, Sean Pilkington, Terry McGarvey, Lee Robinson, Robert Christian, Jacqueline Harris, Nicholas Peter Parker and David Groves. Sir Henry, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these names are an absolute indictment on this government and this government's policy and the lack of change that has happened as a result of these deaths. There needs to be an independent inquiry, just as Jodie Whiting's mother has said, into the deaths of claimant being found fit for work. Until then it should be a moratorium on all reassessments And for new assessments, as has already been said, medical evidence should be the primary data that is used, not these blatantly flawed assessment processes. Sir Henry, any government's first duty, I'm sure you will agree, is to protect their citizens. For our disabled citizens, this government has spectacularly failed them. Like millions of people across the country, I condemn the attacks in Sri Lanka, and I share concerns about the emergency that is climate change. But the deaths of disabled people as a result of a government policy are nothing more than a scandal. And I challenge each and every one of us in this room and outside to rise and say to them, enough is enough.
Thank the Honourable Lady very much indeed for her moving speech. We're going to have to put a 6-minute voluntary limit on subsequent speeches. I now call Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Sir Henry. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I do also want to thank the honourable member for North West Durham in securing this debate. Now, Sir Henry, I want to firstly pay tribute to my parliamentary casework team. I also want to pay tribute to Citizens Advice and Money Matters organisations locally who work with the casework team to ensure that people who are going through this system, ESA, and PIP and other issues in trying to get their social security, the assistance they provide to constituents in Glasgow South West is very much invaluable. And without these organisations, it'd be quite clear that more people would be suffering. Now, I want to also confine my observation, Sir Henry, to the Department of Work and Pensions Select Committee report, which was produced. And as a member of that committee, I can tell you that such was the level of interest on PIP and ESA assessments that 200 organisations submitted evidence, and there was 3,500 individual submissions. Now, that tells you, I think, more than anything else, the level of interest and just the pain and suffering that people are going through as a result of these assessments. And let's look at the department's own statistics in terms of there's 3.1 million applications. The assessments completed is 1.7 million, but payments and awards are only issued to 1 million. That suggests to me low confidence and trust in the assessment system. And as the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, I think it was quite rightly, he said that it's important that the department and the assessment process is correct first time. But I think that that is not the experience of far too many people, and that's why I'm delighted to take part in this debate that the Honourable Member for North West Durham has secured today. Because the simple facts are, claimants can have multiple health conditions, and that can severely that means that claimants can have severe limitations. So I would like to ask the Minister firstly that there was a recommendation to commission and publish independent research on the impact of the application and assessment of both ESA and PIP on claimants' health, and can he give us some progress as to whether the department accepted that recommendation and whether it is going to take that forward. Now, for too often, claims are made by telephone, Sir Henry, and you will be aware, as others are aware, that one of the campaigns I have launched since I got here was to make sure that the telephone tax was abolished, and I'm delighted to say that the government finally listened to that and that the telephone tax was abolished, because it's ludicrous to suggest that claimants were phoning a telephone helpline that cost them 55 pence a minute, and I'm delighted that that is now gone. But as a result of health conditions, there are claimants who require other communications in specific formats, and I'm thinking particularly those with hearing impairments, and making sure that there's other methods of them applying for ESA or PIP and the like. So I would hope that the Minister could perhaps give us an update on that. And the Honourable Member for North West Durham was absolutely right in relation to raising the issue of home visits, because what Maximus say, and told the Select Committee inquiry, is that any request for home visits that they would carry out are to be based on medical fact, not medical opinion. So I would hope that the Minister could also say a bit about the Department's guidelines on home visits that they're giving to assessors. And that brings us to the assessors and the knowledge of assessors. And really, it can be based on partial knowledge or no knowledge at all of specific conditions. And I still remember asking Maximus and Atos if a claimant with multiple sclerosis and a history of depression was to visit their assessment centre, who would they see in that organisation? And the answer came back, they would see a general occupational therapist. Now, really, if we're going to go through an assessment process, if we're going to go through this conditionality, I personally oppose that, but if that's the way forward, then they must see people at the assessment centre with some knowledge or expertise on specific conditions. And we really need to improve the understanding amongst healthcare and social care professionals and claimants about what also constitutes good evidence, including measures, the monitoring and the report and the supply of the evidence. Because for far too many people, Sir Henry, the facts are that the assessment process has become a lottery. I also agree with the recording of assessments that we really need to end the mistrust around assessments. And the facts are that appeals are upheld based on oral evidence given at the original assessment. Not at the appeal, but at the original assessment. And that's why I think recording is a must, and I hope the Minister will give us a progress on that. And also that a full copy of the reports given to increase transparency, and that the quality of reports really must improve. We have contractors who have not once hit the targets for acceptable reports. And if they can't hit that target of acceptable reports, you have to ask the question, why do they have the contracts in the very first place? Because if it was any other part of the public sector where a contractor was failing to hit targets, then they would have that contract taken off them. So I would hope, Sir Henry, that the Minister can tell us about what feedback and quality control measures the Department of Work and Pensions is putting in, because for far too many people are suffering under this system, and we have to ensure that it's improved. But I would say that I'm delighted the Scottish Government is going to do away with private contractors doing assessments, and I think that's something which the Westminster Party should consider too.
Sir Justin Matters.
Thank you, Sir Henry. I'd like to congratulate my friend and member for North West Durham for securing this debate and for the excellent way she introduced the subject, covering a whole range of issues. I felt compelled to speak in this debate because many of my experiences with constituents are similar to those that we've heard, and there's a very clear message that I've received, which I hope the Minister will receive as well, that improvements to the assessments process are very much needed. So some constituents who've attended assessments have raised concerns with me that they believe the assessors are carrying out assessments very quickly and not listening to the answers that are given. A refusal to conduct home assessments is something that we've already touched on, and this is sometimes despite medical evidence being provided that it is a necessary step to take. On one occasion, a constituent suffering from agoraphobia was refused a home assessment. Surely in that situation the need for one was obvious. Now, I noticed part of an overview of the Work Capability Assessment Mandatory Reconsideration and Appeals process for the period October 2013 to June 2018 that 33% of all assessments were closed by the claimant. That is 1.3 million people. That's not a trifling number. It may be that the government line is that all these people pulled out of the process because they were actually fit to work, but I doubt it is as simple as that. My worry is that there will be people within that 1.3 million who would have been entitled to ESA but didn't go through with the process, maybe because they were too anxious or worried about the assessment, or simply couldn't cope with the idea of having to discuss their intimate medical issues with a stranger. So I would like to know from the Minister if there's been any research done about those 1.3 million people, the reasons why they withdrew, and whether people in genuine need have been failed. The same study goes on to say that 15% of all applicants go on to register a mandatory consideration, which is 370,000 people within that 5-year period. Now, some 85% of those decisions are stick with the original decision, and then 21% of those people go on to submit a formal appeal. And I think there is sometimes a misconception that people consider the mandatory reconsideration is the appeal stage and there are no further opportunities to challenge. But those that do carry on to launch an appeal have a success rate, according to these figures, of 63%, although we've heard from our honourable friend, according to CAB, it's more like 74, 75%. I certainly will.
I've often experienced, and my team in my office has experienced, that constituents have challenged on various different levels and got nowhere until they've then come to our office, and we've had a reconsideration straight away, which then gives the impression that they're not taken seriously. And it's the exact same evidence, but it's not until we get involved that they're listened to. Does he agree that that's just such a sad state of affairs?
Yeah, I find that that very disappointing to hear. Not surprising, however. I think the fact that the appeal success rate is so high suggests to me that the not only the initial assessment's full, but also the mandatory reconsideration stage is not a proper appraisal of full merits, and it may be that only when members of Parliament get involved that actually takes place. And I'd say actually a cynical view of the mandatory reconsideration stage is that it's actually just a hurdle to put in front of people to make life a little bit more difficult for them. And I'm shocked that when we do actually get to the appeal stage, recent figures show that the DWP don't even bother to turn up to about 80% of the appeal hearings. And in respect of appeal hearings, I want to pay tribute to my fantastic local CAB who do represent people at the appeal hearings. And what concerns me is that they can't help everyone, and it's those people who aren't able to get representation that I worry about. But there's no doubt from my experiences with constituents, the original assessments are flawed. Many decisions are overturned at tribunal, but it seems the system does not learn from its mistakes. An example is a constituent who was assessed 5 times in 8 years of being on ESA. Each assessment she was found fit to work. On each occasion she appealed, and on each occasion she won that appeal. In the process, she paid £150 to get medical evidence in support of appeals. How can the assessment process get it wrong 5 times? How can the absolute waste of public money that 5 separate appeals must have cost be justified when the final decision has been the same every time? What does this say about the government's approach to people with long-term conditions? And how many times do you have to prove that you are ill and unable to work? Last-minute cancellations have also been an issue. I've heard from constituents whose assessments have been cancelled on the day the assessment is due to take place. And in some of those cases, the constituents were actually at the assessment centre when their appointment was cancelled. This seems to me to be particularly the case when the assessment is scheduled for a time after 3:30. The most recent example of this involved a lady who was struggling when entering an assessment centre. Obviously, it's a very stressful experience, but she was shaking, she was crying, she wasn't engaging, and then she was told that her assessment would be delayed by another 45 minutes, at which point she became so distressed that she had to leave the centre and cancel the appointment. I felt that a very callous and uncaring way to treat someone. And when one of my constituents rang up 2 days before assessment to give notice that she wouldn't be well enough to attend, she was told that it was too late for the assessment to be cancelled and she would be recorded as a no-show. It is double standards of the highest order. So, in conclusion, Sir Henry, I believe that people with long-term conditions deserve compassion, they deserve respect, and they deserve support. They should not be made to feel like they are on trial because they are ill.
Patricia Gibson.
Forward and for the tone that she set at the beginning of this debate. I was first elected in 2015 and I have spoken out repeatedly about the damage that these assessments and the way they're carried out does to my constituents and constituents right across the United Kingdom. And although I'm glad to be speaking in this debate, I'm really annoyed that it's necessary, because it shouldn't be necessary. The Minister is not hearing anything today of which he is not aware. He knows exactly what's going on here, and it really isn't acceptable that we come back time after time to say the same things over and over again. Now, I know the Minister, and I'll save him the trouble perhaps, I know the Minister is going to tell us about changes that have been made. He's going to tell us about people who are not reassessed if they've got a severe disability or a lifelong illness. He's going to tell us that people with progressive conditions requiring high-level support will only be assessed every 10 years. But I'd say to the Minister, that's all very well and good, but it simply isn't good enough. The Disability Benefits Consortium, made up of 80 different charities and organisations, have stated that they did not think assessors had sufficient expertise to carry out assessments. Respondents who had seen a copy of their paperwork following assessment said it badly or very badly reflected the answers that they gave. And we all know this to be true when we speak to our constituents. We all know that the Citizens' Advice have told us that 81% of their advisors report inaccuracies in work capability assessments. So this information is out there, it's in our constituencies, it's in our surgeries, and I know it will be in the Minister's inbox as well. I have had constituents in a state of extreme distress tell me that they felt the questions they were being asked at these assessments were extremely intimate, invasive and inappropriate. Discussing very intimate details of your medical challenges with a panel of strangers, it has to be said, in a context that causes the claimant distress and nervousness, very often sets back the claimant's health, exacerbating their condition. And all of this, Mr Chair, all of this before they are told, often incorrectly, that they are fit for work, with the paperwork not accurately reflecting the answers the claimant gave at the assessment. 51% of ESA claimants are recorded as having a mental or behavioural disorder as their main disabling condition. And Rethink Mental Illness has published a report stating that assessments can be traumatising and anxiety-inducing in a system that requires claimants to collect their own medical evidence and inherently discriminates against people with mental illness. But very often at these assessments, a false sense of security is created where assessors will appear friendly and ask questions, supposedly by way of a preamble to the formal interview. Do you have pets? Do you have a dog? Do you walk it? What lovely weather we're having. Do you like to sit in the garden? All of these questions are asked as though they're a casual conversation, only for the claimant to subsequently discover, upon receiving his or her paperwork, that their assessment decision has been reached on the basis of answers to these so-called casual questions instead of the medical evidence presented. Mr Chair, I think that is sinister. I will indeed.
Thank you very much for making such an important point. I have a constituent who was asked if they could go into their bag and get a pen out. And they did, and then that was put down in the assessment, and she was in floods of tears at my surgery, saying she felt like she'd just been tricked. It's just awful.
It's a false sense that's presented to the people, some very vulnerable people going to these assessments, and it's simply not good enough. Yeah. The simple fact is, and the Minister knows this, that this system, a partnership with the private sector, which has been in place since 2008, brought in, I have to say, under Labour, opened the gates. But the Minister has to understand that this has opened the gates to a place where folk who are sick and disabled are commodified. And it's not working. Nearly half of women involved in work capability benefit tests have attempted suicide. We have seen the reports of claimants being asked, why haven't you killed yourself? And even a double amputee being told he was no longer eligible for the mobility aspect of his disability living allowance. And sadly, these stories continue to emerge, and we've heard today about the very sad case of Stephen Smith, with which I'm sure the Minister is familiar. I have heard ministers say, I can't remember if it's the Minister sitting here today, but I've heard other ministers from the DWP department say that the number of successful appeals against decisions shows that the system is working. Mr Chair, I must confess I've never heard such stuff and nonsense. The number of successful appeals shows that too many incorrect decisions are made which deny the most vulnerable in society, the sick and the infirm, the support they need and the support they deserve. That is why the Scottish Government is committed to taking the lead on obtaining medical evidence so that claimants are not burdened by this. That's why there will be no private sector involvement in assessments, so that there's no profit motive for them to declare claimants fit for work when they are not in a payment by results system. That's why the Scottish Government says that claimants will be offered a location and time and date that suits them for assessment, with home visits for those with travel difficulties. And that is why they've said audio recordings of assessments will be a standard to ensure accuracy and transparency. And I urge the Minister, I urge this Government to step up and admit that the current system punishes those who are unfit to work, those who are sick, and cruelly strips them of their dignity. And I hope the Minister will admit that it doesn't work. And I urge him to look at the measures that the Scottish Government will implement and take a leaf out of that particular book. The current system doesn't work for my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, and it doesn't work for anyone's constituents. And I ask the Minister to do the right thing. I ask him to reach out a compassionate hand to those living with a disability. Anyone who is a Minister for Disabled People should do no less.
congratulate my honourable friend, member from Durham North West, for securing this important debate. The Working Capability Assessment was initially introduced for employment and support agency claimants in 2008. They have also been used in VSS incapacity benefit claimants and determine eligibility for additional universal credit support. It has now been over a decade since the introduction of the Work Capability Assessment, which is why I think it's a good time to reflect on the impact that has had on the lives of claimants across the country. From 2008 to 2017, 48% of all work capability assessment outcomes were successfully appealed in Scotland, and nearly half of all fit for work outcomes reached through work capability assessments were also overturned. In my own constituency of Coatbridge, Chryston and Bellshill, 47% of appeals were successfully in overturning outcomes of work capability assessments, and almost half of all fit for work outcomes reached through work capability assessments were successfully appealed. The most recent national figures released by DWP highlight that 65% of fit for work outcomes were overturned in the period from December 2017 to January 2019. These figures illustrate the negative impact that work capability assessments are having on claimants. They highlight the work capability assessment were failing because they are finding those who are clearly incapable of working to actually be fit to do so. Claimants are then having to go through the appeals process with no access to their ESA payments. This means that they are faced with poverty or destitution, or having to make claims for job seekers allowance or universal credit while waiting for their appeal to be processed. And considering the problems that we have seen with universal credit, such as a 5 weeks wait for the first payment, it is unacceptable, and many find themselves facing financial hardships and further uncertainty simply for challenging a work capability assessment outcome. That's before reflecting on the fact that ESA appeals are currently subject to a clearance time of 30 weeks. Work capability assessments have also led to situations where vulnerable claimants are denied the support that they need. The latest DWP figures highlight 68% of those suffering from injury were found fit for work. 59% of those living with connective tissue disease and 40% of those with mental and behaviour disorders were also found fit for work. How can a government claim to be building a fairer society when work capability assessments are pushing the most vulnerable people into work in spite of their disabilities and medical condition? It is clear the work capability assessments are not fit for purpose. This is a view shared by disabilities charities and the Work and Pensions Committee. The Work and Pensions Committee of 2017 inquiry received over 3,000 letters from individuals who shared their experience of the assessment process. More than 100 people reported that they or someone they cared for had experienced suicidal feelings as a result of this assessment process. And we have heard today that people have took their own lives. Shame. Others highlighted a mismatch between what they have been told assessors about their conditions and the content included in the assessor's written report. In response to the Work and Pensions Committee made recommendations designed to improve the assessment process. These include recording face-to-face assessments and providing clearer guidance to claimants about submitting evidence to support their claims. Similar recommendations have also been made by organisations such as the Citizens' Advice. The Government's response was to ignore these recommendations. The Secretary of State might be striking the right tone, but actions speak louder than words. And the problem with the work capability assessment cannot be hidden through merging with PIP assessments. And I think the Disability Rights UK summed up the shortcomings of this government's approach. You can't merge two badly constructed processes and expect to come up with one fit-for-purpose approach. How right a statement. For as long as the government refuses to make real changes to the assessment process, vulnerable people will continue to be denied the help they need. I want to conclude, Sir Henry, by saying I think that it is shameful that this government has extended Maximum's contract to carry out the work capability assessments until 2021. This is a company which has maximised its profits through work capability assessments, despite the clear evidence that claimants have been denied access to the support they need. I am glad that private companies will be banned from carrying out assessments in the new Scottish devolved social security systems, thanks to the pressure from the Scottish Labour. It's about time that claimants were treated with dignity and respect from this government.
Thank you very much indeed. Karen Lee.
Thank you, Sir Henry. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate my friend, the member for North West Durham, on securing this debate and on your excellent speech too. My office were involved in a work capability tribunal case last Wednesday, and I've obtained permission from the person involved to publicly discuss what she's gone through because of these kind of assessments. Sophie, the person involved, is the daughter of a friend of mine. Her mum and I trained 20 years ago as nurses, and we worked all those years together on a ward at Lincoln County Hospital, so I know her really well. And I provided Sophie with a letter for a tribunal, both as her MP, a qualified nurse, and someone who's known her for 20 years, both before and after a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Sophie tries hard to live as normal life as she can, but I've seen how her illness affects her ability to do that on a day-to-day basis. She's just 30 years old, and she was diagnosed with relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis at the age of 16 when she first developed balance difficulties. And over the following years, she's developed problems with weakness, particularly on the right side of her body, as well as urinary difficulties, pain, fatigue, and visual problems. She uses a wheelchair and struggles with mobility. I actually went on a hen weekend in February, and Sophie was my friend's best friend. And everywhere we went, we were in Boston, everywhere we went, Sophie was in a wheelchair. She simply cannot get out and about on her own. And whereas some patients with relapsing MS are unaffected between attacks, Sophie has chronic symptoms and is affected by her MS every day. These symptoms fluctuate markedly, and even mild infections and changes in temperature can make things much worse. And due to complications during a trial treatment, because I remember Ali and I looked really hard, a few of us, to try and get her on trials, to try and control what she'd got. There was a drug called alemtuzumab. She's now got an overactive thyroid, and she has to have regular blood tests to monitor her blood levels of thyroxine. She left school at 18 and she trained as a nursery nurse, and she worked at a nursery and she loved that job. It was one of her bits of normal. Eventually, though, she had to give up her job due to her MS. And after being forced to give up her job due to her disability, Sophie applied for employment and support allowance benefits. And recently, after a medical review, Sophie was deemed fit to work. The reasons given were that she's got no problem with balance, uses public transport on her own, and takes herself places independently. And the truth actually is that she wears a support on one of her legs at all times, and I saw this when we stayed for that weekend in February, because she drags her leg as she walks, and she has to use a wheelchair every single time she goes out of the house. She cannot walk anything other than short distances indoors. So how she's allegedly going to use public transport is totally beyond me. And the person who completed this assessment was allegedly, and I say allegedly, a competent person to do this. Yet at the tribunal last week, those hearing the evidence seemed surprised that the case ever got as far as a tribunal and dismissed it in less than 10 minutes. Something about it's a level 2 out of 3. I don't understand that terminology, but that's how ill Sophie is, and she's allegedly deemed fit to work. And when someone's deemed fit to work, the process is that they then have to appeal the decision if they feel it's wrong. And Sophie had appealed, but her appeal was dismissed because the examination, which came to such worryingly inaccurate conclusions, is that the only evidence, the DWP, that's the only evidence they'll consider, the actual examination on the day. That's what I'm told. And Sophie was therefore forced to take a case to a tribunal. Whilst her tribunal was eventually successful, she should never have been put through an anxiety-inducing ordeal. She's also actually pregnant. She's got a little boy who's 2, and she's about 8 months pregnant. So she'd got this assessment on top of all the other things in her life. And for people like Sophie, I'm sorry this gets really upsetting because I know her, and it's disgusting what's happened to her. For people like Sophie, it feels like the DWP, Freudian slip there, are working backwards from the conclusion that they are fit to work regardless of the severity of their disability. I meant no offence, I'm sorry. This practice must end, and support must be given to the most vulnerable in our society. Because it's become popular in recent years to demonise those who are forced to claim benefits, to label them as somehow being scroungers or faking their disability. I remember just after Christmas, I watched Danielle Blake on the TV, and a prominent Conservative MP said on Twitter, it's only a film. And actually, it mirrors real life. And people need to realise that. And it's high time that this government woke up to the fact that the vulnerable in our society are suffering because of what they've done to our welfare system. It's meant to be the safety net for those who need it. And they say that the mark of a decent society is how it looks after its vulnerable. And I'm sorry, Sir Henry, but at present, the reality is that that system's broken.
Hear, hear. Well done.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Sir Henry. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Durham, not only for securing this important debate, but for her consistent opposition to any of the measures by the government. And it is a calculated push on people in financial hardship, pushing them further into poverty. But can I say, like, she has been a genuinely welcome member to this House, and I think we need more people who are passionate and who remain passionate and have that integrity to stand up for their constituents. I completely stand with her in opposition to the work capability assessment, and I agree that the whole system needs redrawn. However, I would like to say that I welcome the Minister to his new post, and I hope that he will continue, as he has, to listen to the views across this House and the suggestions of how reshaping the system could work better for people. I appreciate it must be a tall order, with all due respect to the civil servants. I think his department has had probably the most revolving door of ministers of any department across government, although they've all had a fairly mixed tenure. But the point is, I think without the work of the civil servants to keep things running, this government would come to a standstill. So I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge some of the comments that people have made. Now, the Honourable Member for North West Durham highlighted the impact of work capability assessments and the tragic life-ending consequences, and I think that really gets to the heart of today's debate, and it's why we must take action both in this chamber and the government must take action, because the consequences are too significant. Now, the Honourable Member for Strangford and Glasgow North West rightly paid tribute to our parliamentary and constituency staff and Money Matters and Citizens Vice Bureau and all of the charities and organisations who work with these people on a daily basis. These are vulnerable people in society who require our support. And I think really the Honourable Member for Lincoln, who I haven't heard speak before, rightly brought an emotional account and brought to the heart of this debate the real emotional nature that it reminds us of the humanity of this. At the end of the day, we do our jobs day in, day out, but this is people's lives. Now, obviously, contributions from the Honourable Member for Coatbridge and Chryston, who rightly highlighted it was a Labour government who introduced this policy, and don't take all the credit for the social security system in Scotland. I think a few other people had a hand in that as well. Yeah. But the Honourable Members for Ellesmere, Ayrshire and Arran highlighted the damage and impact. The Honourable Member for Cheltenham, who's not in his place anymore, rightly highlighted that you need to get it right first time, and the Honourable Member for Ayrshire and Arran rightly highlighted that by using private sector, we're simply passing the buck when actually we have a responsibility, and it is our responsibility to get this right. Now, the number of appeals against the decisions made by work capability assessments is testament to the fact that the system just does not work. And I could recount all the statistics, but you're only going to stand up and tell me that the contrary statistics, and I don't really want to swap statistics anymore on this matter. I think this is about real people's lives, and I think unlike the revolving door of ministers and unlike the revolving door of different governments who have been responsible for presiding over this policy, it's time that we took responsibility and got this right and not kick it down the road even further. Now, as MPs who have supported constituents throughout the mandatory reconsideration process, it's our staff who have to deal with the consuming and emotionally draining process, but ultimately it's the people themselves and the devastating impact that it has on the individual people's lives when we get this wrong. And when it takes such a long time to overturn that decision, we fail to recognise the significant consequences that has to individuals. Now, the Working Pensions Committee made a number of suggestions in 2017 about the flaws within the assessment process, down to medically inappropriate questions, the mismatch between what assessors had heard and what had been written in the reports, how the assessors overlooked certain aspects of disabilities, illnesses and mental illnesses, how they looked upon fibromyalgia and illnesses like ME. And I think these conditions, while they are often deceptive, medical professionals who have not seen them before can often miss them, and that's why we have to look at the severe flaws in this process. Now, I think I mentioned this in the last debate, but I was invited to witness an acted-out version of of an assessment. I found the whole thing a bit ridiculous, if I'm honest, because it took an hour and a half when it was told at the start it would take 40 minutes, and I felt like I was just getting a wee play performed for me about how in an ideal world it would work. But in reality, that is not how it works. That's not the experience of my constituents. It's not the experience of any of the constituents we've heard from today. And I think the Honourable Member for Oldham rightly highlighted and named each of the individuals' cases, and there are many, many more, tragically, of people who have ended their lives as part of this process. These are really vulnerable people, and ultimately we have a responsibility to do more. And as I said, with all due respect to the Government Minister, I know you're going to stand up and you're going to restate the government lines, and that's absolutely fine, but it does nothing for everyone who's sitting at home right now going through this process. Now, the Government have announced that they're planning to combine these assessments, but I'm not sure how much comfort that will give to any of my constituents or anyone else that we've heard from today. Granted, they might not have to go through repeated questions and the needless extra stress of multiple examinations, but they still have to go through that assessment process, and that's where really the devil will be in the detail. Often for many disabled people, they only receive one of these benefits anyway, so there's no real benefit that I can see to this solution being the only solution on the table right now. And from my point of view, I just really want to call on the Minister to get this right. I think I'm tired of coming to Westminster Hall to another Government Minister who, in any given day of the week or time, it's a new minister in the role and they don't last very long and they don't really manage to get it any further down the road. So I'm hoping that this minister will be different, and I'm going to call on you to listen to all the voices in this House and actually take action and do something.
Thank you very much indeed. Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Sir Henry, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I want to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for North West Durham, for bringing this debate today. And thank you to all the organisations that have provided briefings for today's debate, and for the excellent work and campaigning of so many disabled activists, including individuals from Disabled People Against the Cuts, who have shown that through direct action our voices can be heard. I'll also welcome the Minister to his new post, and I also hope you last longer than your predecessors, and I look forward to working with you in trying to make a difference here. But my honourable friend has made an excellent opening speech. She highlighted the flaws and the unfit-for-purpose assessment framework, the inadequacies of the assessment, and she highlighted eloquently the impact of poor decision-making and the flaws in the process that so many individuals have to go through. These are ill and disabled people that have to endure weeks, if not months on end, of waiting to receive the vital social security support that they are entitled to. She rightly highlights the damning report from the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons or Disabled People, highlighting that this government has caused a systematic violation of the rights of disabled people. She highlighted the harrowing experiences of so many, which I will come on to because it deserves me mentioning it further along in my speech. But this afternoon we have heard from honourable members from across the House, all sharing their testimonies and all actually paying tribute to their caseworkers and their casework team, because we as MPs are the ones that are actually picking up a lot of this casework. We have the members for Ellesmere, Port and Neston, the Honourable Member for Oldham East and Saddleworth, Lincoln, Coatbridge and Chryston, Strangford and Glasgow South West, to mention just a few. But 10 years on from its introduction, the unfit for purpose assessment continues to cause unnecessary harm. And there's no question, I will admit it, the WCA was flawed from its inception, in that it fails to assess a person's ability to work, instead relying on a series of functional descriptors which do not reflect the real world of work or the barriers to work. And it's important to note that it was under the coalition government in 2012 that the WCA criteria was revised and the descriptors were changed, making it slightly more restrictive. But once a person is assessed, They are placed in one of two groups, limited capability for work or the limited capability for work and work-related activity. And then it was in 2017 that the government did the unthinkable, abolishing the work-related activity group component for ESA and universal credit, denying nearly 500,000 ill and disabled people of almost £30 a week, choosing to ignore the additional costs and the distance from the labour market that ill and disabled people face. And when we talk about the outsourcing of these assessments, all honourable members have mentioned it here today, but since 2010, more than £1 billion has been paid to private contractors, including Atos and Maximus. And all of those providers have repeatedly failed by the DWP's own performance standards. And despite their failures, the DWP recently announced that they will be extending the contract for Maximus, and that contract will be extended until 2021. But doesn't the Minister agree with me that by extending that contract for a further 16 months, it is about time that we end privatisation of these assessments and that we bring them back in-house? I also want to ask the Minister again, as his predecessor did promise to do this, to actually publish the contract and the terms of that contract and how much it's going to cost. We've heard members here tell their heartbreaking stories about the failures of these outsourcing assessments. Stories like that of Larry Newman, assessed by Atos, was awarded 0 points and then died of lung problems soon after. Healthcare professionals asking inappropriate and offensive questions, and also compiling inaccurate reports. According to the Citizens' Advice, 81% of their CAB advisors said that they have seen assessment reports which contain inaccuracies. Sorry, I have to keep going, Alex. The flawed WCA has led to inaccurate and poor decision-making. 74% of ESA decisions are overturned at appeal, but less than a quarter of those cases are overturned at mandatory reconsideration. As a result, many are being forced to go to an appeal tribunal where, according to the CAP, the average waiting time is 30 weeks. That is 30 weeks without vital social security support. And in 2017 alone, the DWP spent £120 million challenging these cases at appeal tribunal. So when will the Minister act to address, firstly, the failures in the mandatory reconsideration stage? And my honourable friend mentioned this. It's all of those cases, those individuals that drop out of the system before they even get to the mandatory reconsideration or the appeal stage. So I'd ask, are we recording this? And does the Minister agree with me that it is time that they begin to start calculating and recording the number of people that are falling out of the system? And also, I'd like to know whether he wants to share how much it is costing to administer the ESA appeals. It is good that the ESA 65B letters will be revised for the summer, but I want to ask whether he will pause any further distribution of those letters by GPs. But perhaps the biggest failure of the WCA lies in its role as a causer and contributor to mental ill distress and of ill and disabled people. And my honourable friend from Oldham East listed the numbers of people that took their own lives in 2017, and that is just not good enough. Recently, the government revealed 5,690 people have died 6 months after being found fit for work. That is unacceptable. And it's people like Stephen Smith, who was found fit for work despite having multiple illnesses, who recently died last week. And like many members on this side, we want to send our condolences to his family and his friends, because that is not acceptable. And there is no stronger indictment of a failing system than thousands of people dying months after being denied vital social security support. Social security support, the social security support that is supposed to be the safety net for some of our most vulnerable in society. It is time to scrap the failing system. It is not time to merge or integrate ESA, Universal Credit and PIP, because as long as two assessments are deeply flawed, combining them will only expose claim individuals to the risks of two adverse decisions as opposed to one. So to conclude, Mr. Chairman, This is a cruel, this is a callous assessment framework that has created a hostile environment for disabled people. Labour, the disabled people and disabled people's organisations are clear that we need to immediately scrap the WCA and replace it with an assessment framework that treats disabled people with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And we need to end this hostile environment.
Thank you very much indeed. Before calling the Minister, I'll just remind the Minister that the proposed debate, the Honourable Member for North West Durham, would like 2 minutes at the end to wind up. The Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Sir Henry, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Excellently done with the timekeeping. And I would like to also pay tribute to the Honourable Member for North West Durham. I know this is an area that she campaigned on ever since she first got elected, and always does it with real passion and a real determination to see improvements right across the system. And I think that was echoed by all of the speakers, and I mean that genuinely. I might not have agreed with absolutely every point, you wouldn't expect me to, but it is clear there is a real desire to see continued improvement and emphasising just how important that improvement is to people who are going through this process. And to the Honourable Member for Lincoln, I was very touched by the story that she highlighted. I would like to meet the Honourable Member to discuss this a bit further. I think there's some lessons to be learned from that particular case, and I'm certainly sorry for the experience that she's gone through. Now, this area, Sir Henry, is a real priority for me. I have been the Minister for Disabled People before as a Parliamentary Under-Secretary. I've been an elected representative for 19 years, so I do recognise the comments that we see this firsthand through our casework where things haven't gone right. And I have spent my parliamentary career being proactive with working with MPs across the House and stakeholders, charities and experts in this area. So I do listen to what is said, and I do try to do my best to make improvements. And certainly I hope that is reflected with my record last time as the Minister for Disabled People, and I will continue in the same vein. Now, Sir Henry, the government is focused on this area. We rightly have increased funding for those with disabilities and long-term health conditions, and in this year we are expected to spend £55 billion, which is a £10 billion increase in real terms since we came to office. It's a record high. It's 2.5% of GDP, which is higher than the spend of any other G7 country, and it is 6% of the total government spending, and I think it is every penny is rightly supported by the wider public. But this debate is focused on the 10-year anniversary of the work capability assessment, and I note a few of the speakers did acknowledge that this was introduced by the last Labour government, and clearly it wasn't perfect. Clearly there was need for much needed improvement since that introduction. And we are all committed to play a part in improving the process and to take account of the developments in healthcare, modern workplaces and flexible work arrangements. And at the back of those much needed improvements were the 5 independent reviews, the first 3 carried out by Professor Harrington and the last 2 by Dr. Litchfield, of which over 100 recommendations were made, which we have accepted and delivered. But as the Secretary of State set out in her recent speech, that we need to do more, and that is a real priority. Now, I want to, Sir Henry, initially look at the frontline staff and the actual process. Many people highlighted concerns with that, and since 2015 it's been the Centre for Health and Disability Assessments who took over the delivery of the work capability assessment, and the focus has been on improving the operational process. They've increased the number of healthcare professionals by around 82%, and there are now 1,300 staff directly involved in supporting assessments. They've increased the number of assessment rooms, and they have significantly improved the training programme. And I know many speakers highlighted it, particularly to do with individual conditions. There is broad training on disability analysis and on specific conditions, including multiple and complex conditions. And it covers 3 distinct areas: the principles and professional standards, the assessment process, and the scrutiny and file work with an emphasis on quality. The training is done predominantly through modular and with competency testing at every stage. And then the healthcare professional must undergo the continuing medical education programme and is subject to regular case reviews and audits. And for complex cases, we expect the healthcare professional to refresh knowledge prior to the assessment. Now, one very important welcome addition that has been started to be rolled out is the introduction of customer champions. I absolutely recognise all those who highlighted just how anxious and nervous people can be going towards that assessment. I absolutely get that. So the introduction of the customer champion is so that they can assist those claimants before and after assessments to make sure they receive the best service. We've had good feedback on that, and the intention is that there will be one in every single one of the assessment centres. And also I recognise the comments about communication with the brown envelopes coming through, and there is a commitment from me to work further with stakeholders to improve the letters that come out. I've seen it as an individual MP, and I've sort of taken a deep breath at some of the poor quality of communications, and we do need to improve that. We're using... yes?
I wonder if the Minister might agree with me that subjecting people who've got either a chronic illness, such as MS, or a terminal illness, to these kind of work capability assessments is just unacceptable. Totally.
Well, I can't give a broad brush out. I know what the Honourable Member's saying, and I am coming on to the use of evidence and how we can do more earlier and potentially then with paper-based assessment. I will come to that. I understand, but I can't just give a definitive answer because every claimant has their own unique challenges that have to be addressed. So, but I will come on to that. And also SMS text message reminders about appointments, and that's been welcomed. And a lot of work on the website, including mock assessment videos, so people can get an idea of the sorts of things that they will be going, all looking to try and remove some of the anxiety and the worry ahead of those. There is more to be done in that area, but we recognise that. And these improvements in the training, the extra healthcare professionals, has seen the medium clearance time halved from 25 weeks in March 2015 to 10 weeks in 2018. And customer satisfaction has exceeded the 92% target since that point. And that doesn't mean we're getting it right every time. And that's what I want to now turn on to, Sir Henry. And that's to focus on the MR and the appeals. And I, like all of you, are frustrated when it seems to be clear-cut cases that come to our constituency surgeries asking for our help. And there have been times when you think, how on earth can this have happened? And then ultimately they then could potentially have a very long appeal process to then get what should be the right decision. Now, in the majority of cases, successful appeals are because of additional oral and written evidence. Now, that has to be addressed. And we rightly are, first of all, going to tackle this in two stages. Firstly, with the MR process. We are going to, and we've started doing this with PIP, we are looking to contact the claimant who is disputing the decision and talking to them directly to get that additional oral and potentially written evidence at that stage to see whether we can then improve the changes of decisions at that point rather than waiting for that evidence to come at the end of the appeal process. Very quickly.
Does the Minister think that it is unacceptable that any government policy should cause its citizens to take their own lives or to die? And if he doesn't, shouldn't there be a moratorium on this policy until it is got right? Surely one death is one too many.
Okay. Well, we all recognise that suicide is a tragic and complex issue, which we take extremely seriously. And we take the death of any claimant seriously. And where we're made aware a person has died and it's suggested it might be associated with DWP directly, a review will be undertaken to identify if any lessons can be learnt and can be actioned. Now, let me just make some progress here on this, because this is a very, very important point about the MR process. Now, that it is early stages of this new way of looking at MRs, but there's been very positive results, and we will now roll this out to all of the PIP dispute sites, and we intend to do the same for the ESA sites as well. Now, the second stage is to do with the appeal process. So again, recognising that people will submit additional late written and oral evidence. Let me just get this point. One of the challenges, somebody who, and the Shadow Minister highlighted about 30 weeks wait in some cases for appeals. Now, they may have got that additional evidence week 6, but then the system's saying, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait another 24 weeks until we can actually take that into account. That is clearly not an ideal situation. So we are looking at how we can lapse those appeals where there is new evidence, to reconsider the decision with this additional evidence, to be able to then give them a different decision there. Now, if we don't think that that should change the decision, they have the right to carry on right through to the final appeal process. But if it is something that is clearly going to change that decision, we should be acting as quickly as possible. And in a second, over the last 5 years, only 4% of the work capability assessment ESA decisions have been revised at appeal in the last 5 years. But we recognise that it is in no one's interest that this is only picked up after a lengthy appeal process. So we are absolutely committed to be proactive in this area, and this will be a real priority.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I just wanted to ask for clarification on one point that he made about appeals being successful because of new or additional information. How would the Minister respond then to the fact that people who go on to appeal do so on the basis that the information that they see about them is actually badly or very badly expressed and incorrect, and Citizens Advice saying that 81% of the customers that they see have got inaccurate information recorded about them, which leads to a wrong decision?
Well, I'm coming on further about how we can do more to make sure that the right evidence is into the system at the earliest possible moment and in the right way. We do not want people who should be getting the support to have to unnecessarily go through that lengthy process. We're all in agreement on this, and hopefully honourable members can see this is an important improvement. It's still early stage, but I think this is really, and I've seen this in previous debates, this is the sort of thing that stakeholders want us to do, and rightly we are going to take that forward. Now, on to this point about evidence, and it's referring to the integrated service. And there is a bit of confusion what people thought this was going to be, that this ultimately would be some sort of panacea where you would go for one single assessment that would be for PIP and for the work capability assessment. The reality is very, very few people apply for both of those benefits at a similar point in time. However, for those very few people, it might make sense that they would do, if they wished, both of those assessments on the same day, not having to come in on a Monday and then come in again on a Wednesday, if that's what they wanted to do. But it is very, very small numbers. The thrust of this is to share the evidence if the claimant wishes to, because one of the points that many honourable members made is the challenge often of getting that evidence, whether that's from the GPs, physiotherapists, the hospitals, in a timely manner, in the way that is helpful for their assessment. Now, if they've managed to do that once, then, and they would like us to use that evidence again, and it's with their consent, then that is something that we would look to do as part of building the new digital system and making sure that the claimant has that consistent, better information on being able to share their evidence to reduce the burden of providing the same evidence multiple times. And this could potentially lead to fewer face-to-face assessments where we can gather that crucial, vital, clear-cut evidence earlier in the claim. Now, Sir Henry, just coming to the end of my comments, I do want to pay tribute to all the stakeholders, the medical experts, the charities, and all of the MPs across the House who regularly engage on this issue. We, over the coming months, will be doing a series of roundtables and regional events to gather further evidence with a real emphasis on those with real experience in this area on how we can further improve the system. We want to build trust, transparency and consistency, and we want to improve the claimant experience through a more personalised and tailored approach. And Sir Henry, as a returned new minister, I am committed to supporting disabled people and those with long-term health conditions to claim and receive the benefits they are entitled to, and to ensure people are treated fairly and with dignity. And I thank all of the members from across the House who have contributed today.
Laura Pidcock to wind up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the members who came today to share the painful experience of their constituents. And I'll pay tribute to my excellent caseworkers who work day in and day out to try and get justice for people who are subject to the abuses of the state. Solidarity to all of the disability rights campaign groups and advice services. It is a real shame that not one Conservative member came and prepared a speech and actually showed their constituents that they cared. They will have people who are subject to the work capability assessment, and I think it's symbolic of their complicity in the system. The Minister is now in control of this system, so warm words and sympathy isn't enough. The Minister is control, so action is necessary. I just want to stress this point in the 30 seconds that I've got left. It is just not true that additional evidence is what wins at appeal. It's often evidence that the DWP could have had, and the evidence that people go and say in the initial assessment is the same at the appeal stage. So this is not about blaming advice and support agencies or the person for not giving the evidence in the first place. The evidence is there. It is the system that is flawed. And the language, they are not claimants or customers. They are people who are entitled to this support by the state.
The question is, this House has considered 10 years of the work capability assessment in relation to employment support allowance and universal credit. As many as been say aye, aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.